The League of Women Voters is a national nonpartisan organization formed to encourage citizen participation in government. It never supports or opposes any political party or candidate. The statements and opinions of the candidates are presented solely in the interest of public service and in no way are to be construed as an endorsement thereof by the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters takes no responsibility for any of the views or facts stated by the candidates.
Good evening. My name is Carla Brisbois-Gribbs, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, Oakland Area. Welcome. Welcome to the Rochester Hills City Hall and to our candidate forum tonight for Michigan State House of Representatives, District 45. I'd like to take a minute to remind members of the audience and everyone to turn off their cell phones and electronic devices so we don't get interrupted on this wonderful evening. You know, I really believe that voting is an important right that we have in the U.S. and that the League of Women Voters, Oakland Area, is really pleased to present this opportunity for you to be more informed about your choices coming up on November 4th in the general election. I also want to personally thank the candidates for making time and themselves available for this debate so that we can learn more about you. So thank you very much. The League of Women Voters is a it's a nonpartisan political organization that encourages active participation in government. And we will also work to increase individuals' understanding of public policy issues through education, like tonight, as well as advocacy. The League of Women Voters Oakland Area has prepared a voter's guide, and it will be available on our website at lwvoa.org. That's lwvoa.org. It'll also be available in municipal offices, the library, OPC, and several other businesses in town. So, all candidates appearing tonight will be in the general election on the ballot for Tuesday, November 4th. The candidate who ultimately gets elected to the state representative spot for the 45th district will receive a 2-year term with an annual salary of $71,685. The district includes the cities of Rochester and Rochester Hills and a small portion of Oakland Township. Michigan state representatives are limited to 3 2-year terms. And as you know, the Michigan House of Representatives does share responsibility with the Michigan Senate to enact new laws, state laws that is, and amend and repeal existing state laws. So tonight's candidates are Republican Michael Weber and Democrat Joanna VanRaaphorst. So let's get right to it. The candidates will introduce themselves with a brief 1-minute opening statement, and following that statement, the candidates will respond to questions from our audiences, members that can be directed to any or all of the candidates. There's only 2 of them, so I'm guessing we'll want both of them to answer most of the questions. Each candidate will have the opportunity to respond, obviously, to any of the questions, and also rebuttal answers will be allowed. We've asked the candidates to limit the answers to their initial question to 2 minutes, more or less. Questions and responses, I will remind everyone that can only address issues that pertain to the position of state representative. We, of course, would not tolerate any personal attacks, and we would ask the audience to please hold all applause until the very end of the program. We will now begin with the opening statements with candidates competing, as I said, for the state representative seat in District 45. The first opening statement will come from Michael Weber. Mr. Weber.
Yeah, thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this candidate forum here tonight. My name is Michael Weber. I am the Republican candidate for the Michigan State House of Representatives. 24-year resident of the city of Rochester Hills, grew up in the area, went to school in the area, graduated from Rochester Adams High School. I have a bachelor's degree in international relations from Michigan State University. Spent 9 years experience working as a staff person in Michigan state government. Nearly 7 years of experience serving our community on the Rochester Hills City Council, last 3 as vice president of the council. As you may know, recently Rochester Hills was named one of the top 10 places to live in the United States by Money Magazine. My day job, I'm in the insurance industry as an agent specializing in risk management for clients across the state. I am married to my wife, Julia, and we have a 1-year-old son, James. And I'm invested in this community and in this state as a husband, a father, a councilman, and an insurance agent. The decisions made over the next 2 years will be important in determining if we continue on the road to recovery or fall back into the policies of the lost decade. In a term-limited environment, my experience will allow me to hit the ground running from day one. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we'll hear from Joanna VanRaaphorst. Ms. VanRaaphorst.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who is here tonight and the League for hosting this, and anybody who's watching on the television. I want to share 2 important things with you tonight. I am not a career politician. I've had 34 years in the private sector. I've worked in senior management for 3 major hotel firms. I've worked for a few nonprofits, one including Crittenton Hospital. And then my husband and I invested in our community 24 years ago by buying a dental practice. So when you come to this position from the private sector, you look at things completely differently. And here's an example. In the private sector, if you're asked to do a job and you don't get it done, you just get fired, plain and simple. And yet, for 3 years, we've asked the people in Lansing to fix our roads, and they haven't done it. When you're in the private sector, you have to make priorities, and you have to stick to it. But yet, recently, the Senate met for 1 day in August, and on their agenda was wolf hunting in the UP and whether you can drive golf carts in Mount Pleasant. And I think we can all see that that might not be the biggest priority that we would pay individuals to have concerns. So
Thank you, Ms. VanRaaphorst.
You're welcome.
We are now going to take questions from the audience. So does anybody have a question? There's a few out there. Let me remind you that if you have a particular person that you would like to have the question addressed to, please let us know in advance. Can you hear me now? Okay. This gentleman wanted me to read his question, but I'm going to let him read it himself. I'll hold the mic.
Okay. My name is George Randall, and this is to both of you. Who would you support for governor?
So why don't we start with Ms. VanRaaphorst?
Thank you for asking that question. There's many things that our current governor's done that I have supported. However, there's not been enough for me to vote for him. I think that changing his mind about right to work, I think not standing up to the extreme right of his party, there are a few of those examples that have led me to think that he is just not strong enough to work for all of us here in Michigan, especially dealing with women's rights and the like. So I would be voting for Mark Schauer. Thank you.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I also appreciate the question, and I think, I certainly recall 4 years ago, and it was Mike Bouchard who was running for governor in the primary, who said, whoever gets elected governor is going to be a one-term governor because they're going to have to make so many difficult and challenging decisions to get us out of the mess that we were currently in. And I do think about that when I think about the challenge that Governor Snyder has this year. In saying that, I certainly support Governor Snyder for a variety of reasons. I think he has turned the economy around. We were 48th in some of the economic statistics, and we're now 14th in terms of business climate. He has gotten the budgets done on time, which I think is important, not only at the local level for our city councils to understand what is going to be budgeted for cities, but then also for our school boards and school districts to understand that as well. So he's gotten the budgets done on time. I think he's done a lot of the things he said he was going to do. People may not like some of those things, but I think he's done what he set out to do.
Ms. VanRaaphorst.
Just a quick note, I think we just can't forget that we had that bridge loan for the auto companies. We just cannot forget that, in my opinion, was a tremendous help in bringing Michigan back.
Thank you. And your question is for?
Both candidates. My name is Jim. My question has to do with the primary voting system, that in August, both of you were elected by an electorate that was less than 18% of the eligible voters. There's a lot of us that feel this is unfair. If you get to the legislature, would you entertain a vote that would change this system? If not, why not? If yes, then what key idea would you like to change to make this more of a fair system for those people that do happen to vote and to get more voters in there?
Thank you. Mr. Weber, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and it's a challenging question. I think both of us as candidates, and certainly the other candidates that were involved, you know, you go door to door, you put up your yard signs, you do your mail, and you're hoping that more people are going to come and not less people. But I think the reality is that's kind of what happens in these primaries, and you know, important decisions are made in the primaries, and I think it really is driven by, you know, like in 2010, there was the gubernatorial primary, so certainly there was a lot more interest, but you know, it's certainly something I would have to consider and give some more thought to. I'm certainly open to it. I want it to be fair. I think, you know, having it on a particular day, you know, maybe you look at moving it up into June even, so that there's more people that are still going to school and people in town. You know, I certainly don't have all the answers on that particular question, but I would like to see more participation.
Thank you, Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
That is a good question. And you know what, quite frankly, I haven't thought of that quite thoroughly, but two things come to my mind as we're discussing it is, one, we need ease in voting. We need to be able to vote absentee, no questions. We need to have more times to vote. And also, the thing with the primary is you can only vote a straight party ticket. And so I had people voting for other people because of that. And to me, that seems a little bit odd and not fair. So I think that's a good point. I don't have the answers, but I think it is something that we need to, you know, look into further. Thank you.
Who's your question for?
Mr. Weber. My name is Mike Powers, and Mr. Weber, my question is this. You've stated many times that the regulation of oil and gas activities is completely state-controlled. So if you win and you go to work for us in the State House, what would you do to specifically protect residentially zoned areas and home values from these industrial activities? And if you do believe these activities are entirely state-controlled, why are you looking to quickly introduce and pass a local ordinance just before the election?
You know, I certainly appreciate the question, and I do believe it is state regulated in terms of the ordinances. It's group that Mr. Powers, I think you know very well, has been pushing for those ordinances for many months, and I think that there are some things in the periphery that we can do around the edges in terms of you know, truck traffic, times of operation, that kind of thing that's not regulated by the state. And I think you're seeing these townships and cities look at that challenge of how to craft an ordinance. And so that's going to be before our Planning Commission October 14th. But, you know, I supported the moratorium that's in place in Rochester Hills. I support the Senate Bill 1026, which would include Rochester Hills based on population. And I do share concerns about drilling in high-density areas. One way to address this at the state level is with setbacks, which are currently 450 feet. I think we would need to look at what other states do with regard to setbacks. And you need someone who understands the legislative process that can work together to build a coalition of support among representatives and senators that represent high-density communities in order to get something passed. I mean, right now, it looks like with the Senate Bill 1026, it's just the people that are representing certain segments of the state. And I think you need people up there that are going to be able to build a broad coalition. And it's also important to note that you cannot take away people's private property rights to lease their minerals. And I do support domestic and oil gas exploration, and I see the need for it with rising prices.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Well, I think what we need is a leader. I think we need a leader that will go to Lansing and best represent our area to fix the mess that Rochester Hills City Council created. I want to set the record straight on this a little bit. I have never been a part of the Don't Drill the Hills group. I am not part of a lawsuit against, I just went to a meeting because I was asked to find out more about this oil and gas leasing. And we have a problem. You are putting a moratorium on yourself because you opened up 2 parks and a cemetery for potential oil exploration. So you, in effect, are putting a moratorium on what you started. And yes, I believe in property rights for other people, but I don't believe other people can do something for their house that's going to lower my property value. We just got out of being underwater. Our property owners are very concerned about keeping our home values, and based on what's happened in Shelby, this could be a nightmare, and you guys had a big part of it. And that's a shame.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I guess my only rebuttal on that is it's called compulsory pooling, and there is a process in place where if your neighbor does not agree, but if there's enough people within the neighborhood that does agree, then you get pooled into the process at the state level. And that's the challenge that we were looking at with the city of Rochester Hills. I think in terms of the Don't Drill the Hills, I guess I take it at face value, but when you look at who's funding the lawsuit versus who's funding her campaign, I think the names are very similar.
Ms. VanRaaphorst.
Well, that's just not true. So I just want you to know I contributed $50 for their lawsuit fund, and I put my name on it. There are a lot of anonymous people there. If I believe in something, I put my name on it. So I'm just clearing the record because I think there was a misunderstanding on your behalf, and that's okay. And now you know that I was simply asked to come to a meeting at Thornridge and found out what you folks had done with the parks and the cemetery. And I personally think I think you broke the law, in my opinion. And if you didn't break the law, you broke the trust of your residents. And I think that's very bad.
My name is Bruce Felk. I'd like to ask Mr. Weber a question, and then I guess there'll be an addendum, a little bit different question for Ms. VanRaaphorst. Mr. Weber, you and the City Council, while you've served on it, have overseen several contentious issues in the city of Rochester Hills, one being the deer culling, the second one being the water towers, and the third one being residential oil drilling. In each case, you seem to have gone against the will of the people. And you know, they've been large protests. There's been a lawsuit over the drilling, and my question to you is: if you get to Lansing, will you continue to represent the city of Rochester Hills in such a way that you are not representing the will of the people, but the will of the corporations? And I guess the other question for Joanna on part of that would be, and I guess for Michael too, if you get to Lansing, what is the first piece of legislation that you would introduce?
Mr. Weber.
Well, you know, I certainly appreciate the question, and boy, I wish I could find that Oakland Press letter that Bruce wrote in 2009 commending me on my change of heart on the deer culling issue. That would probably be certainly a popular thing to look at. But you know, I think on each of those issues, you know, I think there's been other contentious issues. I think, you know, when you're in a position like this, you know, there are issues that are going to come up from time to time where a majority, you know, you have to look at what you think is in the best interest of the majority, and not everybody's going to agree with all those decisions. But, you know, I think in each of those cases, and I think in terms of in Lansing, my experience on the city council would cause me to represent the community. I think that that's what people want. They want to represent the community and not the party that they are a part of. So with that, I guess I defer.
There was a second part of the question of what would be your first piece of legislation to introduce, I believe?
You know, I haven't thought that far ahead, to be honest. I have been focused on the election. I think with the lame duck session, you don't know what issues are going to be taken up and what issues are not going to be taken up. So I think there's some time to think about that.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Good question, Bruce. I think that from my observation, let's go back to the oil and gas debacle that we are working through. You did it in such a hurried manner. There was no meetings about it. You did not have any attorneys come in that specialize in it. It was basically, we're going to do this, and it was done in a quick, hurried manner. And again, I'm going back to private sector people. We do not do things in a quick, hurried manner. And so I think the problem is, it was done in such a hurried manner that created the contention. And when I've been here for a few of the meetings, and you treat people so rudely, I can't believe that any of you people actually have a job in the real world, because you cannot treat angry people that way. As I've said before, I worked in the hotels, and we were overbooked in Ann Arbor on a football weekend. So if you want angry people, I've dealt with angry people. But you don't deal with them and make them public enemy number one, which you have created this contentiousness. I don't think that's a word. But I think you are part of the problem with how you have made decisions and how you have treated the residents who are paying you to be their representative.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I guess all that I would say to that is the city has had a history of looking at these oil and gas leases. In 2005, the council unanimously approved testing right at Borden Park. And the minutes are very well available. I was not on the council at that time. But my point is, this is something that happens in communities all across the state of Michigan. It's regulated by the DEQ. And so when we talked about it in 2012, 2 years ago, we had two or three meetings. We had the ability to have comment at each of those meetings. And frankly, that's the first time I think anybody's ever accused government of moving faster than private sector. Usually, my interaction with and being in the private sector myself is the opposite is true.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst. Okay, next question.
I'm Ginger Kettleson. I'm a Rochester resident, and I'll address the question first to Mr. Weber, and hopefully Ms. VanRaaphorst can follow in. If you get to Lansing, how will you work to strengthen our public educational school system?
Mr. Weber.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion recently about the fact that the governor and the legislature, that they cut education funding over the past 4 years. Even the Detroit Free Press has called this out as a lie. They've also put more money into early childhood education. With a 1-year-old, obviously, that's something that's of interest to me. Putting money into education is a priority for me over the next 2 years. And the state, you know, a lot of people don't understand that education is really at the state and local level. It's not a federal issue. One of the biggest concerns that is starting to be addressed and needs to continue to be addressed is the unfunded pension liabilities within the MIPSERS program. And that investment by the state helps local schools, and it helps employees when they ultimately retire. My wife and I are both products of our public school system. Our son James will attend Rochester Community Schools. So we have a lot invested in the future success of our local public school districts. I've met with Dr. Shaner. I talk with him on a regular basis. I also talk with some of our school board members on a regular basis. So that's how I address that.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
That's not enough, quite frankly, in my opinion. And here's why. We won't go on about the numbers. I think what people don't understand is, yes, they put more money in, but actually to the schools in the classroom, it's lower. And when the last budget just went through, I called our schools and I said, okay, where are we at? And they, unfortunately, we were down $500,000 from what they projected. Now that's a hit. Now, you're telling us that education's a priority, but on your website, it's not even listed as a priority. And you say you talked to Dr. Shaner and some school board members, but you got to do more. I've been to 13 PTA, PTSA meetings. Wow. And it's quite interesting because I used to be on PTA. You know, I was a PTA mom and what have you. That's where you sit in and you hear what they're doing in Lansing and how it directly affects our schools. And this is what I've heard at all 13 meetings from either a parent or an administrator. Either Lansing doesn't know what they're doing to us or they don't care. That I've heard that time and time and time again. And to me, if you're going to support the school, first of all, then you would be endorsed by the local educators, and you're not. You decided to go for the DeVos Group, which is the Great Lakes Education Project, and they want to privatize our schools because I guess the DeVosses don't have enough money. And I do not want to make money on our children. And part of the big problem that was created, it started with John Engler, is these charter schools, which were supposed to fix things, have gone bananas. They are unregulated. We have people with sweetheart deals, and it is not properly there's no proper oversight, and I support the moratorium to stop that because that is hurting all of our schools in Michigan.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not regulated, why is the superintendent Flanagan, why does he have like 9 of them on notice after the Detroit Free Press articles? I think there's a place for charter schools in our state. They need to be held accountable, just like public schools do, but they are there to serve in areas where the public school district is not keeping up, and it offers an alternative. And I support that so that kids in Michigan can have access, all kids can have access to quality education.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Just real quick, I'm not against charter schools. I'm against for-profit charter schools. And I think there's a big, big, big difference. Thank you.
Next question.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Granzo. I am a Rochester resident and a public school teacher. So kind of going with the other question, I have tried to reach out to my state representatives in the past and made phone calls and invited them into my classroom because speaking to a superintendent and a school board member, they are very disconnected from what's going on in the classroom. So I guess my question would be, that's not working. Would you be willing to come into the classroom, speak to the teachers, come to some of the union meetings to really find out what's going on? Because I'm really sick of calling my state reps. They don't call me back. They won't return emails. They just want to brush it off. And as a public educator, it's getting really bad and it needs to change.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
I think it should be part of the job description that you only work in Lansing, 100 days a year. I think it should be mandatory that each state representative spend 1 full day in an elementary school, 1 full day, I'm talking 7 in the morning till 4:30 or 5. You don't have to go correct papers. That's too much. In a middle school, and you should go to high school because you have no idea what's going on in the school unless you're there. And I will tell you, I talked to my twin sister 5 days a week, 5th grade teacher. There's so much that we can't know because it's confidential. And there's so much that educators go through that we have no clue. Just because you went through school doesn't mean you know how to be an educator. So yes, they should do it, and I'll be there right after November. I'll come into your classroom.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the idea, and I probably don't get a whole lot of credit for this, but I have done a few times where we've done like a March's Reading Month, and I've been asked as a city council person to come, and so I've done that. I'm going into actually it's more of a family friend, but they have a school in Royal Oak. I'm going October 6th to talk about government and talk about different things like that. So I mean, I understand that you're being critical of people that are currently in office. I'm not currently in that particular office, so I would certainly be open to going in there. I think as James gets older, I think you're gonna probably have to keep us out of there, But I think we're going to be very involved. Parents, as my parents were. Both my parents were involved in the PTA, not only in California but also in Michigan. So,
Mrs. VanRaaphorst, did you have a rebuttal? I'm sorry. Okay, thanks. And our next question.
Nationally, in inflation-adjusted dollars, as compared to 1970, this nation is spending on education 2.5 times as much money, yet On the most recent international math tests, the U.S. ranked 31st in the world. Obviously, since money is not the answer, what solutions do you offer to get our kids up to international standards? Thank you.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, Lee, I think that's a good question. And, I think to some degree it goes back to the discussion we had on MIPSers and the fact that that's unfunded at the state level. And so I think, and Ms. VanRaaphorst also said that money is going towards funding that system. And whoever screwed it up, whoever did what to it, it still has to be funded. And so that's a real issue. I think in terms of the standards, again, the Great Lakes Education Project, I think, is taking a bad rap at these forums. But, from my perspective, they have offered some reforms. Take, for example, third grade reading. They want to do a bill through the legislature that you have to be competent in reading by the third grade or you're not moving on. And so stuff like that, I think I would support. There's some opposition to it, though. I mean, it should be a no-brainer, and there's some opposition to it. So,
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Good question. I think that from my discussion and from my conversations with numerous educators, what I've been told is they've had a moving target for 20 years. Everything keeps changing, so just when they get it organized, no, now it's changed. Technology is a big issue here because we cannot not have technology, and yet that costs a lot of money. And then the third thing I want to bring up is we need to support educators from the college on up. We need to make it back to a position where you want to say you're an educator, not hide your head because it's been downgraded so and denigrated. We've made them public enemy number one. And the fourth thing is we do need high standards because our kids do have to compete worldwide. And so the higher the standards, the better.
Okay, and our next question is for?
Both Mike and Joanna. What is your stance on equal pay for women, and what steps specifically have you taken to support or resolve this issue? Being 24 and a working professional, I need to know that we're living in the 21st century and that this shouldn't be an issue anymore.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Well, women's rights is kind of a big deal for me. I've been working on it for 55 years. Well, not all 55 years. The fact that we still don't have a law that says we have equal pay is just wrong. And it's neat to be my age because I know friends who looked at, by accident, their coworker's paycheck. This is back, a couple years ago, and they got paid differently, and their boss said, oh, well, they have a family. This is real. That's been happening time and time and time again. And it not only hurts women, it hurts families. And to me, I have a boy and a girl, and I don't value one over the other. And if my daughter's only going to make 30%, then I want a rebate on her college tuition because girls cost as much to educate. So I would be all for it, and it would be one of my priorities because this is just almost a no-brainer.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's not right. Obviously, my wife is a working professional. My mom, working professional, now retired. And if they were making less for doing the same, that's not something that I would support, no.
Thank you. And our next question?
In the state of Michigan, about 23% of our children live in poverty. In the Rochester area, it's only 15%. Is that a concern to you? And if it is, do you have any ideas what to do about it?
Mr. Weber, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, that is a concern. And, I think it's a combination of the role that government can play, but then also the role that, churches, different organizations can play. I mean, we have a organization right here that I think we all support or can support, Blessings in a Backpack, and their whole goal, Kim Williams does that project, and with the JCs, we've been able to help them from time to time. And, their goal is to put these backpacks together with food, because what they're seeing is that kids that they're perhaps in poverty, they're in the Rochester area, they're not eating during the weekends. They're going home on a Friday afternoon. They're not eating until they get to school on that Monday, and that's just wrong in our community, in any community. So, I'd have to look at all the programs in the funding, but I think that there's a lot of different ways, not only public sector but private sector, that we can address that issue.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst?
This is a great concern for me. We do live in a wealthy area, and we do have super programs. Mike and I are both involved with Raya and all these different things, but there's so many communities that don't have that. So there is a role for government to step in, and we've had tax breaks or tax hikes to the poor with this administration, and there was the big fight over minimum wage. You cannot live on minimum wage, and to think that that's just an entry-level position, that is not true. So I think there are some things that government can do and should do, because hungry people, children do not learn well, then, it's just a vicious cycle. And so, but the essence of the problem is that you have to care, and you have to fight for it, and you have to find the funds, and you have to be determined to do so.
Mr. Weber?
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of that in terms of what we've done in the community. My only objection, I guess, to the minimum wage increase is I don't think it has the full effect that people think it has. A lot of a lot of employers, I think, are going to be laying people off because of the minimum wage increase, and that's unfortunate.
Thank you. And your question is for?
My question is for both candidates. I feel that it's really important as a state representative to communicate with your constituents. Our current state representative has been known to meet with people at McDonald's, and he also used to meet with people at the OPC. I really think that there should be a little more open-door policy with the state representative meeting with your constituents. Our current state rep has a very limited office hour, very hard to get a hold of him. How would both of you communicate with the constituents in this community? Thank you.
I think Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Well, communication is key, and I agree with you. I think, again, people from the outside look at government employees and say, what the heck? Why are you so out of touch? Why are you not actively engaged? To me, you're only in Lansing, 100 days a year? You have the whole summer off. I think people should be actively meeting with the schools, actively meeting with groups, and you should have open hours once a week, and they should be all over the place. You should have it twice a week if you have to. This notion that, well, just if you can't make it, come to Lansing is a bunch of hooey. Going to Lansing is an hour and a half. I just went there with some of the Shelby people for the for the drilling issue. One lady spent $15 an hour to go to Lansing for the day. So that's not the answer. You're representing people here, and you just better be out and about.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And, in my current role, I've tried to communicate different ways. I try to respond to emails as they come through. I think the same holds true at the state rep level. I spent 9 years as a staff person, and whatever boss I worked for, it was always the constituent service and the constituent service role. I feel so strongly about that. I put it on as one of my 4 things that I put on my literature, because a lot of the issues that I dealt with were people, they couldn't get through on their unemployment. They couldn't get through the Secretary of State. I worked through those issues. I didn't give it to like an intern or this and that. I worked on those issues myself, and I think that experience certainly is helpful in this case. You do have to have office hours. You do have to make yourself available, and then just being involved in the community and just being at events, at things in the community. I think in addition, I've heard from both people, my current colleagues on the Rochester Hills Council, but also on the Rochester Council, that they want the state rep and the state senator to come and give updates at their meetings. And of course, those are cable cast and this and that. So I think that that's a great way to get some updates out there. And you know, when I worked for a boss just a few years ago, they would do that at their city halls as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sounds like a lot of the programs when we talk about education spending, we're in a wealthy area. So first one question and then a follow-up. I'm wondering, I guess Mrs. VanRaaphorst first and then Mr. Weber, whether either of you support a graduated income tax, maybe to pay for some of these things, and then if so, I mean, how high are you willing to do that? And if you do that, I mean, how much, you know, what incentive does a Rochester Hills family have to stay in Michigan if they are taxed higher to pay for some of these things?
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
I've never thought of that, so I really don't have, I would not care to comment on that specifically because I've never, ever thought of that. I will say, as far as school funding is concerned, we've got to work with Proposal A because right now we are hamstringed. We cannot have money for technology, and that is part of the problem, the broadband and the technology. So a different tack would be approaching Proposal A. But as far as the income tax, I haven't looked into it to make a comment.
Mr. Weber?
Yeah, I wouldn't support that. And in fact, you know, when we were, you know, back 6, 7, 8 years ago when we were, oh, I guess it was probably less than that, probably 6 years ago during all the government shutdown stuff, the legislature did raise the income tax, and that has not been reduced back to that level. So I wouldn't support that. I think, you know, it's a $50+ billion budget with a B, and I think we need to find the money within that.
Yeah, just wondering, Mrs. VanRaaphorst, if you got to Lansing, would you be open to the idea of raising taxes on Rochester Hills residents?
I'm not going to say yes or no because I don't have the facts in front of me. I mean, so I guess I don't know enough about it to comment.
Thank you.
This is for both of you. Once in office, would you draft a bill for a part-time legislature?
Mr. Weber?
Yes, and here's the reason why. You know, again, and I think Ms. VanRaaphorst talked about the 100 days. I think it's maybe a little bit more than that, but it's not much. I think something like 42 or 43 states out of 50 are part-time legislature currently. And, you know, I think they find stuff to do to fill the time. And I think what you see in these part-time legislature states is they get everything ready for that period of time. They're getting the budget ready, they're getting the bills ready, and I think it's a much different environment. And so I've been a long-time supporter of part-time legislature. I think it's something that should be done. But, you know, I do have a little bit of a concern in terms of the term limits with the part-time legislature, although I'm not necessarily for, you know, abolishing term limits or anything like that, but I think that has always been a kind of a scary part of it because some of these states don't have the term limits, but they do still have a part-time legislature. So that's worth looking at.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst?
I would also support it. I think already they're part-time. I don't know anybody who works 100 days and makes $71,000 plus benefits. So, and then what that senator just had a talk like a pirate bill. I mean, this is nonsense. You know, some of the things that they come up with, again, they've lost the focus of what are their priorities. Let's go back to fixing the roads. How about we fix the roads? And so if you have to go in there and get down and dirty and get it done in a shorter time, and they should be paid a lot less.
Our next question.
Thank you. It's a real easy one. It's about abortion. Sorry. Mr. Weber, you've proclaimed proudly your endorsement of right to life, and I looked up the requirements to earn that endorsement, and if it requires that you would be willing to sponsor legislation that would change the Constitution of the United States to say that personhood begins at conception. This may lead to women being investigated by the police for miscarriages. Many forms of birth control would be banned, and also in vitro fertilization would probably go away because embryos cannot be disposed of. Can you explain why you think a woman's constitutional right to privacy and health care are secondary to an embryo. And also, Joanna, you're more than welcome to weigh in on it.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, my stance is well known with regard to this issue, and I think we talked about it at the last forum. Good people can and do disagree on this issue, and for me, I choose life, and I'm proud to be endorsed by Right to Life of Michigan. I'm proud of my Catholic upbringing. I'm proud to be a parishioner at St. Andrew Catholic Church, and that's all I'm going to say.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Well, I think there's so much we have in common with this, and it divides us, and that's tough. I think we all agree that we wouldn't want anybody to have to go through an abortion. That said, for example, with the new Affordable Care Act, with access to birth control, actually the numbers are down. So to me, our business, our dental business is all about prevention. I'm all about prevention because I think we all know that when we have children and are ready for them, everybody wins. And so again, I'm still into a woman has the ultimate right to decide what she wants to do, and government shouldn't interfere with that.
Thank you.
This is for both of you. I would be interested in your opinion on inclusivity issues for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender questioning, and on gay marriage.
Mr. Weber?
In terms, I'll take the second part first. I think in terms of gay marriage, I think that that's going to be something that's going to ultimately be resolved one way or the other by a vote of the people. That seems to be what's happening in a lot of these other states. And it will be something that will be a ballot initiative. In terms of, a few years back, we did have a group of residents that approached City Council about doing a human rights ordinance. And I opposed it because it's really a state issue in terms of amending Elliott Larson. The state has a whole department that reviews and investigates complaints that are made with the Elliott Larson Act. And now there is some discussion at the state level about amending Elliott Larson to include sexual orientation. The discussion may come up in lame duck, and I'll continue to look at it.
Thank you. Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Well, you didn't answer a question, but I guess I'll answer it. I think from a business point of view, we are foolhardy not to update our Elliott Larson. All the major corporations, GM, Ford, AT&T, Whirlpool, are all saying, why are you tying our hands and limiting the type of talent we can attract to Michigan? So as a business person, why in the world would we limit who we want to have either move here or stay here? And so I think it's imperative that we include the LGBT community under this Elliott Larson Act. And so, and just as a person, these are our family, these are our friends, these are our neighbors, and to think there's no major religion that thinks that people should live in fear and that they should be fired or denied housing or asked to leave a restaurant from who they are. I don't know any major religion. And the third thing I'd like to share with you is when you really think about it, marriage is a religious thing, but it's also a state thing. I have several friends that got married by the justice of the peace. And so I would be for people being allowed to be married, but never having, forcing a religious group to marry them, because if that's against your religion, then that's against your religion. But it is really a state's right. And let's face it, folks, we have a homeless shelter in Detroit, and 40% of our homeless people are gay and lesbian people that have been tossed out because they've determined who they are. And we've had hate crimes against people because of this. This is a serious thing, and this is America. It's 2014, and everybody should be treated equally.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I did want to clarify, I was saying that I was watching what's going on in the lame duck. I'm not necessarily saying I support it. And with regard to these companies, the companies, there's nothing that says the companies can't do what they're advocating the state to do. They don't have to fire somebody just because they're gay. And my guess is a lot of the corporations that are pushing that already have those policies on the books within their own Fortune 500 companies.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
You're right that they can do it, but it's still in a state where people are not welcome. We have the internet. People can Google the state and say, am I in or am I out? And it shouldn't just be college professors. I think of course, the universities want college professors from all over to be attracted, so they're for it. It should be every single person, and not every single person works for a major corporation. And for us to think that we want people to live in fear and not be who they are, I find that abhorrent.
And your question is for?
My question is for, I guess, Mike Weber first, and then Joanna can rebuttal if she would like. But my question was kind of going off of the last question. You said that the Elliott-Larsen Act was not something that you were in support of or not in support of. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what your opinions are on that subject if it were to come in front of the legislature?
Mr. Weber.
Well, I'm always willing to listen. I am familiar with the coalition that's pushing this. I know there's been some discussion about, having, just sexual orientation in there. And I know that some of the folks on the other side of the aisle do not. They want to see kind of an all or nothing. And I think, my experience in the legislative process is you don't always get 100% of what you want. I think there are, it seems to me, just reading the tea leaves, that there's some Republicans that support it. I'd have to really think about it some more and get all the information. I think discrimination is wrong. We did a resolution when this ordinance issue came up a couple years ago, going on the record stating that. That's a step that we would have to look at the state level.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
I just don't think that's good enough. I think you're either a leader or you're not a leader. You either believe in something or you don't believe in something, and I believe in equal rights. Thanks.
Thank you. And your question is for?
Both of you. Can either of you explain why or how the Democrats say that Snyder cut education by $1 billion, and Snyder says that he increased education spending by $1 billion?
Let's start with Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Well, we kind of went, what it is they cut $1 billion in funding. They have brought some of it back. Some of the money has not gone to the classroom. It's gone to, for the pensions of the teachers. So that's where I think we get kind of gummed up on the numbers. I know personally our school is down, and I know that there's larger class sizes. So I think it's not what it is, it's what you call it, as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I think, we did talk about it a little while ago. The Detroit Free Press is probably, my guess is they're probably not going to endorse Snyder. They even came out and said that it's an outright lie, that he's cut funding by $1 billion. Putting this money into MIPSers is not just a small thing. If anything, it's starting to shore up that system. It's a long way to go from shoring up. But then in addition, the school districts have to pay into it, so it lessens the amount that they have to pay into it. That's my understanding. So.
Thank you. And your question is for?
Both candidates. Thank you for both taking my question. You brought up the lame duck session, which is currently happening up in Lansing right now. There are a group of Senate bills which could potentially allow a tax-paying entity to look back 3 years to contest taxes during an expanded window of time. The current law on the books only provides for a 1-year appeals process. These bills could potentially erode local public districts and intermediate school districts' property tax revenues. So this is a question regarding tax revenues and how they impact public education. Do you agree with this current legislation that is in the lame duck session? And if you do, how would you propose that school districts make up for the lost revenue?
We'll start with Mr. Weber.
Is this the TIF capture, like DDA? Okay.
Senate Bill 1038, 1039, and 1040.
I think it's a House bill maybe then that I read up on that Representative Kowal did with regard to TIFs and DDAs. I have to admit I'm not familiar with that current legislation. You know, I'll go home and look up the bill numbers tonight. You know, I think in general anything that happens in the lame duck has to really be watched, and it happens during both sides. You know, when they have majority. We're not currently in the lame duck. We will be in the lame duck after the November 4th election, but they only have 1 week of session left that ends on Thursday, and then they have 3 or 4 weeks set up for November and December. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of stuff. You know, I don't, from a transparency standpoint, I don't like the fact that they save so many things for lame duck. And again, I spent 4 years as a staff person in the minority, and I saw the same thing. So both parties do it, unfortunately.
Mrs. VanRaaphorst.
Well, I would not be for it. I have read not the ins and outs of it, but the general concept is, you know, if we keep eroding our tax base, even you folks on city council, I mean, eventually we do have to pay for things. And again, with education being my top 3 priority, I would be very concerned about that. I will say that it seems to me there's a lot of laws, just from my outsider point of view, that are passed that are not well thought of at all. I mean, I look at, you know, the helmet law that was just a disaster, and I think we should pass less laws and really think them through. That's, again, what you do in the private sector. You don't just willy-nilly say, well, hey, let's do this to satisfy the fact that you want to pass a bill and have your name on it. I'd rather go up and have one bill and have it have meat and potatoes and be solid than to be a party to some of this mishmash.
Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I actually would agree with a lot of that, and I think with a part-time legislature, you would see less legislation. But, you know, my perspective, and I've talked to people at the doors about this as well, is trying to establish in the office what's the problem that we're really trying to solve, and then the unintended consequences of, you know, if you do that, what's going to happen, you know, on the other end. So I don't think you'll see, you know, if I'm elected, I don't think you're going to see a ton of bills introduced just for the sake of introduction. So.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we just now have enough time for our 1-minute closing statements that will begin in reverse order of the opening statements. So first, we'll begin with State Representative District 45 candidate, Joanna VanRaaphorst.
Well, I appreciate everyone's time tonight, and I really don't have anything prepared except the fact that I think I need to reiterate. I am not a career politician. I want to go to Lansing with some fresh eyes. And I want to ask hard questions, and I want to do a good job. And then I don't need to be a senator. I don't want to be a governor. I just want to do a good job, and I'm on to the next thing. And I just want you to know I'm a leader. And we little people can be leaders. And I've been a lifelong leader in a variety of settings, and I think that's what we're hungry for now. We're hungry for somebody that if they say something, they mean it, and they've got some backbone to stick to their guns and get things done. And that's why I think I would be your best choice for state representative. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Michael Weber.
Yeah, again, I'd like to thank the audience. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum tonight. As I go door to door within our great community, that again was recognized as one of the top 10 places to live in the United States, I hear concerns about roads, education, health care, many other issues. Our state has begun to recover from the lost decade, but we are not there yet. A lot of work still needs to be done. People I talk with want a person with relevant experience in budgeting and policy to go to Lansing to work together to achieve results for our state. I have a history of working together to get things done. I have experience to get things done in a term-limited environment. For more information about my campaign, please visit my website, weberforstaterep.com. I appreciate your consideration and vote on November 4th. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, audience, for coming up with some great questions. We certainly appreciate and thank the City of Rochester Hills Mayor Barnett, Rochester Hills City Council for the use of their chambers, as well as the Rochester Hills employees behind the scenes, Jason Dale and Kyle Weisick, for providing tonight's outstanding venue. This forum will be telecast, so you can see it again, on Rochester Hills City channels Comcast 20, WOW 10, and AT&T 99. And it's going to air every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. It'll also be replayed several times before the election on the City of Rochester channel. And of course, it will be available on demand at the Rochester Hills website, and it's rochesterhills.org/RHTV, as in Rochester Hills Television. rochesterhills.org/RHTV, and that will begin October 1st. The league also, again, has prepared a voter's guide for the general election. It'll be available on October 9th at all municipal offices, the library, the OPC, and also several other businesses around town, as well as on our website, lwvoa.org. So on behalf of Ann Edwards, who coordinated tonight's forum, all our League of Women Voters, Oakland Area volunteers who helped out tonight, I'd like to say thank you very much. Congratulations to the candidates for their participation. And remember to vote on Tuesday, November 4th. Good night.
Take it.